Anyways. So the first thing, how do we start these things? Is there a plan? Do I have a plan? Should I have a plan? I don't know. This is what happens when you have way too much coffee though. Hey, what's up guys? Today my mission is to document exactly how the winter weather affected my plants here in my Arizona tropical garden, food forest. This is my first winter gardening, and I know I'm in Arizona and a lot of people probably don't think that we even get cold. What do you got to worry about out there? Now we do get pretty cold. Sometimes it's actually colder here than it is in New York City, believe it or not. But I do believe there was some days this year we got down into like 24 or so. I know it was definitely below 30, at least for a couple hours throughout the night. And it's definitely enough to take out some of these plants. Mainly I am just appreciative for being able to like have this going on, right? To have this yard, to have this opportunity to learn from experience, to be able to do this for myself, be hands-on, because that's how I learn best, is hands-on. I am by all means no expert. I don't have any kind of like formal training or degree or anything like that. So my videos are really just about sharing, documenting my journey, my experiences, sharing what I've learned, sharing my progress, and just sharing the joy that I have for what I see happening and the experiences that I have out here. So again, what I want to do today is just kind of go through some of the garden here and just kind of document how the Arizona winter affected my tropical gardens. I will say that, for one, to sum things up, everything did a lot better than I anticipated. It really did. I was actually very surprised at how many things were still thriving when I thought that they should be dying. And we were well into December, even getting up to the end of the year, and I was still getting cucumbers. I still have a watermelon on the vine. So I anticipated seeing a lot more brown, a lot more of those decadus plants that were going to be losing their leaves, barren garden and all this stuff. Fortunately, even for my New Year's party that I hosted out here, I had a lush green garden. So let's go ahead and take a few different views and walk around a little bit, and I'll just kind of show you what changes I've noticed and overall why I think it went the way that it did. The first thing that I want to look at is the grapes. These are one of the things that I anticipated were going to be just completely gone, you know, down to nothing but the vines, and I was going to be waiting on them to come back next year. But you can see this one, they're two different varieties, and I'll put the names of the varieties if they are on the video. You can see obviously there's still a lot of green on this, and right now it is, I think, January 12th today, so I'm fairly certain that this is going to stay that way and then just continue to kind of come back and give me some more growth now that we're heading into spring. This one mainly just kind of turned color. Most of the leaves are, I will say, they're loose. Like you can see, they are ready to fall off. I do love the color that it turned though. The purple, it kind of just reminds me of a maple leaf. They have that kind of almost sunburst look to it. This is my Jamaican cherry. It's one of two Jamaican cherries that I have. This is the older one. It's one of the first batch of plants that went into the ground. This one went in early May. It did pretty well. Now they don't like cold at all, but they give off these little red cherries, and when they are in good shape, the taste is great. When it's cold, the sweetness isn't there, and sometimes it's just kind of goopy and not good. So the biggest challenge for me in getting through the winter in my garden, being that it was my first winter, was trying to figure out when I was seeing changes, when I was seeing some dryness or changes in the leaf coloring. I had to learn, is this something that this plant is known to do? Is it going to happen? Is this something that is because of the cold? It's being overexposed to cold and the frost? Or is it because it's not getting enough water? Now I obviously cut way back on my water for the winter. It's also monsoon season going on around that time. So, and then I have a lot of mulch. So my mulch was doing a very good job at retaining a lot of that moisture. When I would come out and I would kind of move some of the mulch around and look underneath, it was still very wet. And in some places, that wetness never really dried. So I didn't want to keep my watering system on. So I pretty much turned it off, just kept an eye on everything. But I had to really try and figure out, how do I make sure I'm not giving it too little water, or that I, if I need to water it. And that's what I had a hard time with. You could see on this Jamaican, some of the top leaves did brown and crisp. Now it's still not something I have a definitive answer on, because that could go both ways. If it didn't have enough water, it would start at the top down, right? But also if it's overexposed to the frost, it would start at the top, because these leaves have a canopy up here that is protecting them, so they wouldn't be as hit by that cold. Personally, I think that it is because of the cold, because I just know that Jamaicans don't like the cold at all. And then if you look at the other leaves, they're not like all curled up and drooping. And if it were a water issue, all of these leaves would be drooping down, kind of curled up a little bit, and just kind of letting you know that they need water. All right, so I do have a second Jamaican cherry as well. Right here, this one went in quite a while after, almost late fall, I would say, one of the last ones that went in. I did notice this one was affected by the first frost that we had. The leaves looked pretty rough, and so at that point I did cover this one with frost cloth, and I kept it, made sure they weren't making contact with the leaves. I had it lifted up here, and it wasn't a proper box around it or anything, but it was covered with the frost cloth. And this one obviously struggled very harshly. These leaves are just completely dried out, and the only reason I'm okay with it is because there are some leaves over here that still look healthy, and so I'm confident this tree is going to bounce back for me. This is a Manila mango, and this one obviously also is not covered by anything. There's not a lot of trees around it. There's no canopy covering it of any kind. I did have it also surrounded by frost cloth, not touching the leaves at all. You can see that this one did take a hit. When I first uncovered this one and saw that, my first thought again was underwatering, which maybe it could be, but I did do some research online, and it looks like this is what happens when the mangoes get a little too cold. Shangri-La mulberry right here. This guy was also frost covered because it was just such a young tree. And thankfully, absolutely no damage to it whatsoever. It actually continued to put off new growth while it was inside that frost cover. It looks pretty good. It looks healthy, and it's good to go. This is my white mulberry, and this mulberry obviously doesn't have any leaves. It's a decadus though, right? So that's to be expected. It just dropped, maybe like January 3rd, it dropped its leaves for the most part. And once it did that, I came in and I pruned it, and I gave it its winter pruning. Pruned it a pretty good amount. You could see it all on the ground. I do the chop and drop method, so when I'm pruning, I'm just chopping it, letting it fall to the ground, adding to my mulch, letting those nutrients break down and go right back into the plant. But it was probably about out to here or so. But with the mulberries, if you haven't grown them or don't grow them, they tend to grow fairly fast, but they also seem to tend to want to be a bush almost. They grow out very fast, looking for that light, and the twigs, or the sticks on them, are not very strong at all. And I've seen some of them kind of get out to be like 5 feet, and they haven't even gotten any strength. So pruning them back allows them to thicken up the main bottom portions and allow that to be strong enough so that in its next year, now it will grow off of these, and it will be able to bear more weight and be a stronger tree. You can also see back there I have my other mango. That's a Namdok Moy mango, and absolutely no cold damage that I can see to that at all. That actually has been putting off new growth, and it looks like I even have some buds that are ready to go on that guy. Alrighty, all right, right here we have a banana. It looked really good for the first part of winter. It got through 1 or 2 frosts, So I didn't cover it, and on the third frost I came out in the morning and it just took a hit, and it was enough to do what it did here. So at that point I then wrapped the bottom in frost cloth. I did this whole light thing, which not really effective. Wouldn't do it again. These things don't even really put off heat, so what's the point? It's better to use one of those like outdoor, you know, Home Depot type halogen lights. They actually put off heat. So, you know, put a covering around it, build a little covering around it, put the light in there and let it actually give heat. But when this does happen, I did learn what you want to do is just leave these dead leaves on there, because they're actually going to help protect the plant further from the frost, so it doesn't actually spread and kill the whole plant. And then of course, once these are ready to come off, they'll come off, and that'll just help give more nutrients down to the ground. It will. When I look at this, there's some black on here, which tells me that it probably got a little bit more water than it needed for wintertime, which actually surprises me, because I had this thing, I mean, it is covered with more than a foot of mulch, and I didn't water this one at all. So it only got what it got from the rain, and I protected that as much as I could. But it still appears that maybe it got a little bit more than it needed. So that's something I'll pay attention to next year. Okay, so right here I had my Adamoya, and the Adamoya, obviously it looks really good right now. Looks healthy. This is one of the ones that I was most concerned about. Not only because it was very young, but from what I have learned and read about these, they are one of the more susceptible tropic, subtropic to the frost and to the cold. I have this rebar here, and I have another one behind me over here. And then in the fence, I actually drilled, I don't even know what to call these things, but they're kind of like a pipe holder that you can screw this galvanized metal pipe into. And I put a little piece in there, probably about a 2-inch piece. And then I took the 1/2-inch PVC and I slid it down onto the rebar, bent it, and stuck it into the pipe there. And the same thing on the other side. And then what I did is I had, and this is actually left from summer, I didn't ever take it down, but just shade cloth. It was like I think like a 60% or more shade cloth. And I had that just kind of arched over. It was protecting it from the sun in summer. I left it up as kind of a little makeshift canopy for it to help with the frost. And then I also did cover it in frost cloth underneath, and that seemed to work really well. The only leaves that it lost or that were affected were ones that were actually sticking out of the protection. Now, so back in here I have another banana. I think that is a dwarf Namwa banana. I have to check on that. I'll put it right here, but it is a dwarf variety banana, and it does appear to have done really good. This was also covered in a frost cloth along with the Tropicana Black Canna Lily that I have right next to it. And the banana actually, while under the frost cloth, put off a whole new leaf. So I think that it did really well. And I think that it was also helped by the canopy of the castor above it. And the moringa was kind of cascading or canopying over it as well before I winter pruned it. Okay, so looking over here, this little makeshift fence line was fully covered in my watermelon vine that I had. I did not pull these vines off. I'm just going to let this continue to build up over the years so that even when it goes into this decadus state, this fence line will be always covered, unable to see through. This didn't actually even start to die off until I would say at least a week or two into December. So I thought that this did pretty well too, and it still had watermelons on the vine that did good, and you can see that it actually didn't even fully die back. There's still leaves here that are underneath the canopy of this that are okay. Okay, so everything in the herb garden did really good. I don't think I really lost any of the herbs, except for the nice big basil I had here, which obviously those don't do well in the cold at all. Tried to cover it, didn't work. Lost the basil, that's okay. I think it'll come back in. It still has a few little leaves on there. The only thing in the herb garden that I did see the leaves drop on, I don't think I lost it, I think it just got cold, dropped the leaves, was the plumeria that I have down in the corner over there. I also saw the same thing happen to the plumeria that is out in my middle gardens, But the plumeria that is right behind where my camera is right now, in between the lemongrass and the big canna lily, actually still has leaves on it. So that kind of tells me that what I've learned there is that if it's well protected and surrounded, that definitely helps with the frost, and it helps protect the plants, the microclimate, and I'm seeing that in action, and I think that's one of the coolest things. Other than that, what I am seeing in this area, just before I move on, is again, my peppers did really well. I did not know if, I mean, my habanero was growing pretty well through the end of the fall season, and even into winter. I didn't know as it started to get really cold if they were going to make it through to ripen, but they did. All my habaneros have either ripened or are ripening. My cayennes did the same thing. My hot banana peppers did the same thing. The habanero did lose most of its leaves, but it still continued on with that fruit. So we can see that in this area, the canna is still alive, right? What I noticed is that it lost a lot of its color. This is one that has a very, very pretty variegation. It's got like orange and whatnot. I'll put the name of the variety of it down in here too. But it lost all that color when it got cold. Did it die off? No. Did some of the leaves die back a little? Yes. But it's okay. This is the plumeria down here that I was talking about, so it's still there. What else can we see within my view here? Can you see right here is okra? The okra stayed alive, but it stopped producing. Now it tried, again, well into December, it was still trying to put off okras, and then eventually it just kind of gave up, but it still has some new leaves growing down there. And my first time growing okra as well, so I'm just leaving it. I didn't cut it back or anything. I'm just curious to see what it does, how it responds, and how it bounces back. So right here is my peanut butter fruit plant. This is one of my favorite plants that I cannot wait till it starts fruiting. And you know what? Let me just go ahead and remove this so you guys can see it. But you can see what I did is just like some of the other ones I made. I put in 3 stakes in a triangle form around the plant, and then I wrapped that in the frost cloth. I didn't do the plastic, I did frost cloth, and then I zip tied them or clipped them up top to keep that from getting out. And it did really well. Not only that, it's surrounded by this little microclimate, and to be honest with you, this might even be about double the size that it was when it went into this winter season. So it did really well. I'm very, very happy with it. This is one of the ones, along with the Adamoya, that I was kind of concerned of, but it did awesome. And guys, back here, this is a this is a Sweet Millions cherry tomato plant, and I just left it out here, and not only is it still green, it's growing and producing tomatoes like through winter. What is that? Like, I don't know. I thought tomatoes were supposed to die off when it first started getting cold. I thought it was one of the first things to go. This thing's rolling. It's putting off tomatoes. So I'm super stoked to see how that's going to turn out here in the next month or two with spring. Okay, so to kind of wrap everything up, there's really not anything else that got affected in any way. There is another watermelon plant hiding back here that actually still has a watermelon on there for me that looks really good. There's still some leaves on it that are thriving. The passion fruit back there is still thriving. All of my guavas did great. None of them even really seemed to take any damage. I have a little baby Suriname cherry down here that I didn't plant, and it came from seed in mulch, and that started growing in the late summer, and it's about that big now. I did put a little bit of frost cloth around it just to make sure it survived. It did great. My figs, they took quite a long time. It was after January, probably January 3rd, when they dropped their leaves, and that happened overnight. I think that these plants that waited were waiting for my New Year's party to happen and be over with, so everybody that was here could kind of tour through all the greenness and see all the lush garden, and then they were like, all right, it's time, we're going to take a nap now. But that's it, guys. That's my garden. I'm not going to really go into detail on all the plants because this is not the garden plant tour. This is just the video on how my garden responded to the cold, and I wanted to kind of hit some of the things that I noted. I think that overall, I would say that this garden did really well for winter. This is a very young garden. There's not anything out here that is a year old yet. Like I said, a lot of this stuff dies off or dies back. A lot of people have lost some of these same plants that I have during the winters. So I'm pretty happy with and proud of being a new gardener that is growing these tropicals and really didn't lose a single thing during the winter. But I attribute that first and foremost to the mulch. Having that 8 inches to 1 foot or more of mulch, depending, you know, the area. But that mulch really did keep a lot of things warm, and it retained the moisture very well. The other thing I attribute that to is cutting back on the watering. I think that if I would have continued on with watering and letting my automatic system do its thing, I would have seen root rot a lot. But I really paid attention to the rain and how much water these plants were getting. And then the third thing that I want to note is, of course, the microclimate. I don't even have that good of a microclimate. Like right underneath where you are right now, there's absolutely nothing. Right, there will be, because there's casters growing up, and there'll be another video on that. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. But I definitely recommend use the casters, create a microclimate. If I didn't have these canopies that I do in these certain areas, I think a lot of these plants would have struggled way more than they did. You could see the difference between the two mangoes, the one that was surrounded by casters and the mulberry, and the one that was out there by itself. Both of them were wrapped in fabric cloth. One of them got affected, the other one didn't. The one that didn't had a microclimate. So mulch, watering, microclimate, and of course, you know, the covering. But even without the covering, these things did really, really good this year, this winter. Super happy with it. And thank you for hearing me out, spending this time with me, walking through the garden with me. Hopefully you maybe pick something up that you can do in your garden, or maybe you have something to share that you have done in your garden or that you do, and that might help me out for next year. If you do, drop it in the comments either way. If you got questions, drop it in the comments. Concerns, drop it in the comments. Emotional outbursts, don't drop those in the comments. Probably not going to read them. But either way, mission accomplished, and y'all grow on.